Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Most welcome to the class of Islamic Banking and Finance. Dear students, today is our 7th lecture for Islamic Banking and Finance. Today we will discuss the financial management in Islamic Banking and Finance, some concepts of financial management such as risk and liquidity management, systematic risk, that are macroeconomics factors, unsystematic risk, that is unique to a firm or an industry, how the risk is managed, the liquidity management, and the difference in managing risk in Islamic banking and conventional banking. Dear students, recall from the previous lectures we studied the musharaka, murabba, istisna. Also we studied salam and different concepts regarding Islamic banking. Today we will discuss the risk which is related to the Islamic banking and conventional banking. So let me start with the very first topic, that is financial management. Dear students, you are familiar with the financial management. Financial management in general, if we define the financial management in general, financial management refers to the three main decisions of the corporation. The first decision is the investment decision, that how firms, corporations, organizations invest their capital. The second decision is the financing decision, that how they raise funds for their organization, for their corporations, for their firms. And the third decision in the financial management is is the management decision. The first decision was investment decision, the second decision is the financing decision, and the third decision is management decision. That how corporations, how organizations manage their investments, their corporations, their businesses, their entities, their firms, how they manage their investments, how they invest in different projects, how they raise funds, and how they manage these funds and these investments. So this is financial management. In financial management, we also know that why they do this, all these decisions, why they are involved to make all these decisions. There are some goals. So every organization has a main goal. That main goal refers to the maximizing the value of the firm. So objective of financial management is to maximize the value of the firm. And this value of the firm is determined, is measured by the maximizing the wealth of shareholders. So this is the objective of the financial management. This is the objective of the firm, objective of the organization. Every organization has a ultimate goal. An ultimate goal, they carry on their business with ultimate goal, that is maximizing the value of the firm. The value of the firm are the maximizing the wealth of their shareholders. So the value of the firm can be measured through the profitability and risk level. That how the business is profitable and how the risk is involved with that business. So this is the level of risk and the profitability of that organization. So the value of the firm is measured through its profitability and its risk level. In reality, one of the key aspects of financial management is risk management. Risk management is the key aspect of financial management. When organizations involved in the financial management, so the key aspect of this financial management is risk management, because every decision process, every decision or every process will have a risk. When any type of decision is taken by the organization, so it involves risk. Risk is related with that decision, risk is related with that process. So risk arises when there is a possibility of more than one outcome. You don't know the ultimate outcome. Ultimate outcome is unknown. So this is called risk. Then risk arises when you don't know the outcomes, that what will be the ultimate outcome, what will be the final outcome. So when you don't know the final or ultimate outcome, then risk arises. There are multiple outcomes. If there are multiple outcomes, plenty of outcomes, then a risk arises. Element of risk and liquidity in Islamic banks. Risk is the variability or volatility of unexpected outcomes. If there is variability, there is a deviation between the expected return and expected return and real return, or expected income and real income. This is called variability. If there is deviation between expected return and expected real return, so this is the variability or volatility. So you unexpect for the outcome which is occurred in the organization was not expecting this outcome. So this is called the risk. Risk is variability, risk is deviation, variability between expected return and real return, or expected income and real income, volatility between expected income and real income. So this is the variability, the deviation, the volatility of unexpected outcome. Risk can be divided into two parts or two types: systematic risk and unsystematic risk. Systematic risk is a risk that arises from the macroeconomic factors. You better know about the macroeconomic factors, such as change in economic infrastructure has been changed, and this brings risk to the organization. Political and social risk, political environment, political instability, social problems, social issues, social dilemmas, they also bring macroeconomic factors, that is systematic risk. Business environment, external either internal, so this also external environment or internal environment, it also brings the systematic risk. Interest rates, when interest rates are not stable, they are volatile, there is a huge variability in interest rates, so it brings the systematic risk. Inflation rate, if there is no stable prices in the economy, stable prices in the country, so this inflation means persistent increase in the price level. So if there is persistent increase in the price level, so it brings the systematic risk. War and international incidents, war also bring a systematic risk. In international incidents, you better know about the international incidents such as currency war, financial crisis, so these are international incidents. Nowadays you better know about the COVID-19, so it's also international incident. So these are all related to the systematic risk. As such, it can be hedged. These risks can be hedged, can be placed with something, but cannot be diversified. These risks are very tough. They are not diversified. They are not able to the organizations are not able to diversify all these risks completely away. It means that organizations are unable to bring to zero. The risk cannot be equalized to zero. Systematic risks, before we talked about that, there's the interest rate risk, foreign exchange rate risk, commodity price risk, and industry concentration risk. Industry concentration risk is the risk related to the portfolio of the industry. When you concentrate on one country, on one product, on one portfolio, so it means it's industry concentration risk. And commodity price risk means that there is a risk in the market. The commodities which you are selling in the market, they will not provide the feasible income to the organization in the future time. So it's called commodity risk, commodity price risks. So all are these the systematic risks. Next, the unsystematic risk is a risk that is unique to a firm or an industry. It's unique for the firm. It's associated with the random cause that can be eliminated through diversification. This risk is diversifiable. Organizations can diversify this risk, unsystematic risk. Before we talked about the systematic risk, that was unable to, organizations were unable to diversify that risk. So the unsystematic risk is diversifiable risk, and it can be controlled through good governance. If there is good governance in the organization, so this will be controlled. The example of unsystematic risks are regulatory actions. If there are good regulatory actions in the organization, so the unsystematic risk can be controlled. Mismanagement of a firm. If there is a good management in a firm, there is a best management in a firm, then it will be controlled. Level of difficulties. If there are no level difficulties, so risk is controlled. The consumer preferences. If consumer preferences are good for your organization, then your risk is controlled. Loss of key accounts and labor strikes. If you do not lose key accounts or there are no labor strikes, then the risk is controlled. The unsystematic risk is controlled. But if there is unregulatory actions in the organization, if there are weak regulatory actions, if there is mismanagement in the firm, if there are labor difficulties, if there are consumer preferences are weak, if there are loss of key accounts or labor strikes, then the unsystematic risk arises. Risk management. How the risk is managed. Nature of financial institutions. Operations expose them to different types of risks. Operations of the financial institutions exposed to the different types of risks. Both depository and non-depository financial institutions. Depository financial institutions are the banks, and non-depository financial institutions, you better know about the mutual funds, insurance companies, and other organizations. So they are non-depository financial institutions. They are risky businesses. According to Saunders and Cornett, according to them, in 2006, they assessed that. They brought this sentence in their research paper that the depository and non-depository financial institutions are more risky businesses in the world. There are 5 common risks faced by financial institutions are the credit or default risk, interest rate risk, liquidity risk, underwriting risk, and operating risk. Credit risk or default risk means the other party is defaulted and cannot pay all the credits, all the liabilities to the provider. Interest rate risk. If there is volatility in interest rates. If there is liquidity risk means the risk which is related to the day-to-day operations. It means short-term financing. Underwriting risks. If there is underwriting risk, underwriting means pledging your bonds, your securities with financial institutions. And operating risk means operations risk, the risk which is related to the operations. So all these are the managed by the depository and non-depository financial institutions. Largest source of serious banking problem is credit risk, the risk of counterparty default. When the counterparty defaults, so it is called credit risk. Is defined as a risk that the value of portfolio may change due to the unexpected change in the credit quality of issuer or trading partner. If the trading partner has been defaulted, then the credit risk will arise. For example, any organization delivers goods to another organization on credit. So if the party who received the deliveries, that party defaults, the party cannot pay the obligations to the provider or to the deliverer of the products. So it is called default risk or credit risk. Islamic finance is also vulnerable if care is not taken. They also become weaker if the care is not taken, not in terms of its product structuring, but in relation to non-performing financing due to its credit policy. If their credit policy is also weak, if their credit policy is not managed, then they also face with the credit risk. Islamic banking is involved in risk taking by its very nature, with risk minimized by way of valid risk management tools. Islamic banks are also involved with the minimizing of risk, but as conventional banks, as other commercial banks, Islamic banks are also unable to minimize or minimize to zero or equalize to zero the risk, or or eliminate the risk. So it's very difficult. Risk is not equalized to zero. Risk is unable to equalize to zero. Every organization cannot equalize the risk into zero. In Islamic banking, there has to be real business conducts, as a result of which profit or loss can be incurred, and hence Islamic banks take on risk. Islamic banks also works on real businesses. They are also involved in the real businesses. They also get projects. They also make products. They also produce products. So these production of products, they are real businesses taking the projects, different projects, government or non-government, public or private projects, but there is profit and loss sharing. So this profit and loss sharing is the way result to the risk arising. The additional risk that Islamic financial institutions have to face or compared to conventional finance is asset risk. They are faced with the asset risk, but the conventional banks are not faced with the asset risk. Market risk also. Sharia non-compliance risk, it's also an additional risk with the Islamic banks. Greater rate of return risk, greater fiduciary risk, and greater legal risk. Asset risk, I told you before, a real business. Islamic banks are involved in the real business. They are involved in the production of assets. So asset risk is related to the Islamic banks. Market risk, the risk which arises from the market, from the customers, from the marketplace. Sharia non-compliance risk, the risk which is related to the not compliance of the Sharia principles. Return risk, rate of return. If there is lower rate of return, so it's also risk for the profit and loss sharing among the partners. Greater fiduciary risk. Fiduciary risk is the possibility that an agent will not act in the client's best interest. Will the business or project is assigned to an agent, so that agent is not working on the behalf of the principal, on the behalf of the owner. So this is called fiduciary risk. So this risk is also involved with the Islamic banks. And greater legal risk. There are low legal rules and regulations for the Islamic banks. So all these risks are related to the Islamic banks, addition to the conventional banks. Asset risk is involved in all modes, particularly in murabba, onward sale to the client with markup price, salam. We studied murabba with markup price, salam after taking delivery from the seller, and ijara is all the ownership related risk belongs to the banks as long as the asset is in its ownership. So this is the ijara, this is the salam, we also murabba, musharka, and all these risk for all these concepts, the risk is involved. If the asset is damaged without any fault on the part of the lessee and it's not deliverable, the bank's right to receive rent will cease. The bank's right to receive rent will cease because the damage is involved in the products. The product is damaged. The product is not able to deliver. Product is not deliverable. So the rent which bank will receive will be seized. Shirka based risk, the profit and loss sharing, musharka, we also studied in the previous, recall from the previous lectures, is born as per the share in the ownership market risk. Next, credit risk. Credit risk is simply defined as the potential that the borrower or counterparty will fail to meet their obligations. We talked about it in the previous slides. In accordance with the agreed term, it is risk of failure of the counterparty, the party who is taking the products on credit, and that party will liquidate it, default it. So that party cannot pay all the liabilities to the deliverer. So it is credit risk. Their commitment and also referred to default risk. This arises from the inability of the counterparty to service the debt. They cannot service all the debts of the organization on the agreed term. On the agreed term means which in agreement, in contract, all the terms and conditions were written. So on the according to those agreed terms and conditions, they are unable to pay all the debts of their organization. So it can also arise when the solvency or credit rating of the counterparty changes adversely. Means the solvency of the organization is taking adverse, and the credit rating of that organization or counterparty is changes adversely. It means it is being minus, subtraction. So the credit risk also arises from the solvency rating and from the credit rating of the counterparty of the organization. In Islamic banking, there is a limited availability of credit rating defined from external agencies. So we better know about that. All credit rating agencies are related to the conventional banks, not related to the Islamic banks. So there is a limited availability of credit rating companies, credit rating agencies defined from the external agencies. So they cannot make rating for the Islamic banks because there are limited organizations, limited agencies who are working for the credit ratings. Risk management has 4 elements that should be well defined and considered in the financial risk analysis for Islamic products, which are the construction of the financial contract. The organization must consult the financial contract for all the businesses. Identification of the market. They must know that which market we will survive, in which market we will survive, in which market we will get profit, in which market we will have customers. Identification of the behavior of counterparties. What kind of counterparty is? What is the credit rating of that counterparty? Is the counterparty providing credits or all the debts to the credit providers in a meantime, Introduction of the above two within a time period mapped into the financial contract. Above two or three contracts will be on the period, on the mapped on the period, on the basis of financial contracts. So these are the four main elements should be well defined for the consideration of financial risk analysis. For the consideration of financial risk analysis. Next topic, which is liquidity management. Liquidity management means ensuring that the bank has sufficient liquid funds available for a smooth running of its operations in order to meet short-term financial obligations. If organization meets the short-term financial obligation, so there are available funds, sufficient available funds to meet that short-term financial obligation. When there are available the sufficient liquid funds with the cash with them, so this is called liquidity management. That how the banks must, how the financial institutions must have cash in hand to meet the short-term financial obligations. In short-term financial obligation, you better know the salaries, the day-to-day operations of the organization, the taxes, and the also the rents of the organization. So all of these are the short-term financial obligations. So how much cash must organization carry on with themselves, carry on with their hands to meet the short-term financial obligations. So this is called liquidity management. Liquidity management can be managed by dealing in the Islamic interbank fund market. So when the one organization or the one financial institution on the basis of Islamic financial institution needs to meet the short-term financial obligation, so they will contract with other Islamic financial institution. So it is inter-Islamic bank fund market. It is also called Islamic interbank fund market. It's also called money market. The most useful instrument for the transaction is the Mudarba ratio that could be negotiated according to market conditions. They must make Mudarba with other banks. When organizations meet the short-term financial obligations, so they will contract with other Islamic organizations, Islamic financial institutions. So it is called Islamic interbank Islamic financial institutions dealing. So when they contact with other organizations, so they negotiate according to market conditions. So their Mudarba will be negotiated according to the market conditions. That what will be the market condition? On the basis of that market condition, they will make Mudarba with other banks, with other Islamic banks, and they will raise funds for their meeting of financial obligations. Liquidity management in Islamic bank can also be done through securitization of the pool of income generating assets. All the income generating assets must be securitized, must be secured with the Islamic banks. So this is a process is called securitization. If the bank requires liquidity, it may sell sukuk. You better know about sukuk. Sukuk is the Islamic compliance bonds. As conventional banks have corporate bonds, Islamic banks also have the Islamic compliance bonds, that is called sukuk. So if the bank requires liquidity, it may sell sukuk in the secondary market to another bank to generate cash. So this is very easy, that we have common sense. When one Islamic bank gets cash or gets money from another Islamic bank, so they will not be provided free of cost. So they will be provided with the sukuk. So this organization must sell sukuk to another organization, and that organization will provide them price of that sukuk as a cash. If it is in surplus, it can purchase sukuk from the market. So if the organization or the Islamic bank has excess money, then it can purchase sukuk from the money market, from the another banks, from the market. So liquidity management can be securitized. So Islamic banks meet financial obligation, short-term financial obligation by selling sukuks to another Islamic banks and getting cash or raising funds to meet these short-term financial obligations. The difference in managing risk in Islamic banks and the conventional banks. This is another topic of today's lecture. Risk management is a process that protects assets and profit of an organization. You better know about it. It's a common sense. Why organizations involved in risk management? To protect the profit and protect the assets. By reducing the potential for loss before it occurs. So they reduce the potential loss before it occurs, mitigating the impact of the loss of its if it occurs. They weaken the impact of loss and executing a swift recovery after the loss occurs. When the loss occurs, then they can smooth recovery from the loss occurs. Financial institutions are a business entity owned by their shareholders, and the objective of business entity is to maximize the shareholders' wealth. In the start of this lecture, I told you that the business or the entities or the financial institution or any business has a ultimate goal, that is maximizing the shareholders' wealth. One way to achieve this objective is that the management should efficiently diversify the unsystematic risk and reduce or transfer the unsystematic risk. They must minimize the unsystematic risk, transfer the unsystematic risk, or reduce the unsystematic risk in the financial sector. Risk management is an area of high interest due to the financial crisis of the last 2 decades by the Galendo and Tamio. Tamio and Galendo, before there was 2 times financial crisis in the world. So on the base of these 2 financial crises, the risk management area is more concentrated, the most concentrated. Why organizations most concentrate on the area of risk management? Because of the 2 financial crises were exist in the world in the last 2 decades. Basic concept of risk management process and system. How they manage risk? What is the process of managing risk? The first step in the process of managing risk is establishing appropriate risk management environment and sound policies and procedures and strategies and other plans and policies. So first step, organizations must make a risk management environment, a sound, appropriate risk management environment. They must have risk management environment. In that environment, they must have sound policies, sound procedures, sound operations, sound strategies, and sound plans. The second step, maintaining an appropriate risk measurements. They must measure the risk. Before it occurs, they must measure the risk, mitigating and monitoring the process, weakening and monitoring daily basis the processes, that how the process is going on. Either our process will be parallel to our organizational goal or deviating from our organizational goal. And also adequate internal control. They must control internal processes of the organization. They must control all the employees. They must control all the processes, operations of the organizations. So these 3 steps are most effective ways, effective processes to manage the risk. The difference in managing risk in Islamic banks and conventional banks. Islamic financial institutions can be riskier than the conventional banks or conventional financial institutions due to several reasons, including the specific nature of risk and unlimited number of ways to finance project using either profit loss sharing or non-profit loss sharing. Recall from the previous lectures, we studied the profit and loss sharing and non-profit loss sharing concepts. So there are 2 contracts for the Islamic banks. One is the profit and loss sharing contracts and the non-profit and loss sharing contracts. So due to these 2 concepts, The Islamic institutions, the Islamic financial institutions are more riskier than the conventional banks. Scarcity of hedging instruments. They don't have hedging instruments. They don't have enough hedging instruments. They cannot hedge their risk to another instruments. Conventional banks have more instruments, such as they have options, they have futures, they have forwards, they have government securities such as treasury bills, treasury notes, treasury bonds, corporate bonds. They also have bonds, debentures. They also have preferred stocks, common stocks. They can hedge their risk, but there is scarcity of hedging instrument. There is limited instruments to hedge their risk. Undeveloped interbank money market. They don't have developed interbank money market. Islamic banks don't have enough developed interbank money market. So they cannot easily get money for the meeting of financial obligations, short-term financial obligations. And market for government securities. They don't have market for government securities which are Sharia compliant. They are against the Sharia compliant. Government securities are against the Sharia compliance. Therefore, Islamic financial institutions may be more vulnerable to unfavorable events than conventional financial institutions. Inability to utilize money market makes Islamic financial institutions more susceptible to liquidity risk. As there is inability to utilize money market makes there is a weak money market. Before we talked about that, there is a weak money market for the Islamic financial institutions, so they are always faced with the liquidity risk. For Islamic financial institutions, liquidity risk can be considered as one of the most critical risks due to certain factors. Which are those factors? Limited liability of Sharia compatible money market, interbank market. So there is a limited Sharia compatible money market. Before we talked about that. Shallow depth of secondary market for Islamic financial institutions. Shallow depth means narrow depth. About less secondary market for Islamic financial instruments. In the market, there are not enough consumers, enough customers to purchase the Islamic financial instruments. So everyone is going to the conventional financial instruments. So this is shallow depth. And the third problem, the problem of the lender, is lost reserve from the central bank. So we better know about that. Central bank for a country is the lender of last resort. Lender of last resort means that when banks are liquidating, they do not have any type of way to raise funds for their obligations, to meet their obligations, then they go to the central banks. So central banks provide them funds to meet all the obligations, to meet all the debts of the organization, to meet all the liabilities of the organization. So therefore the central bank is the lender of last resort. So lender of last resort for the Islamic bank, there is no, because the central bank will not provide any fund, any cash to the commercial banks without interest. They provide interest. We better know about that. That central bank's interest rate is the leader in the corporate interest rate. The market interest rate is the follower. The market interest rate will determined by the central bank's interest rate or discount rate. So central bank will not pay any type of cash to the commercial banks without interest, without discount rate. So they will provide discount rate to the commercial banks, and commercial banks will get funds from the central bank by involving discount rate. So there is no lender of last resort for Islamic banks, because Islamic banks cannot go to the central bank, because central bank will get interest from them. So when the Islamic bank will provide, when the Islamic bank goes to the central bank and gets funds from the central bank, they will get interest. The central bank will demand from them interest. So the providing of interest by the Islamic bank will bring Islamic bank as the against the Sharia compliance. So it's against the Sharia compliance. So this is the main problem for the liquidity risk for the Islamic banks, that Islamic banks are unable to get funds from the central banks. The last group of risk faced by Islamic financial institutions are governance risk. We better know if there is weak governance in the organization, so they will face the risk. Governance risk refers to the risk arising from a failure in governing the institution. If they fail to govern the institution, negligence in conducting a business and meeting contractual obligations, they cannot conduct a business and meeting contractual obligations, and from a weak internal and external institutional environment, including legal risk, whereby financial institutions are unable to enforce their contracts. So this was your today's lecture regarding financial management, regarding risk and liquidity. We studied the systematic risk, unsystematic risk, risk management, liquidity management, and difference in managing risk in Islamic banks and in conventional banks. So, dear guys, dear students, I hope you got plenty of knowledge regarding financial management in Islamic banking and finance. So, it was very easy. You are familiar with the financial management concepts. You are familiar with the risk management, you are familiar with the concept of terminology of risk and liquidity. So we discussed different topics, that how Islamic financial institutions are facing the risks. So additionally, the conventional banks, the Islamic banks, are more vulnerable to the risks because they are more riskier, they are most riskier than the conventional banks because of some reasons we discussed before in this lecture. So I hope you got knowledge about the financial management. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.